You may be seated. Mr. Connolly, will you please open the doors? Thank you. Order. Presenting and reading petitions. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition which reads as follows. Whereas our government has committed in law to protecting 20% of Nova Scotia lands and waters by 2030, but is continuing to permit logging of old forests of high conservation value on Crown land. Therefore, we, the undersigned residents of Nova Scotia, call upon the Premier to pause all harvesting and road building activities in forests over 80 years old on Crown land in Lunenburg County until such a time as 20% of Nova Scotia's lands have been permanently protected. There are a total of 706 signatures on the petition, and I have affixed my signature as well.
The petition is tabled. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you. I would like to present a petition which reads as follows. Whereas over a quarter of those who are homeless for the first time are over the age of 60, and whereas nearly 6,000 people are on the wait list for public housing with an average wait time of 2 years, therefore be it resolved that the provincial government ban evictions of seniors whose incomes would qualify them for public housing until there is a place in public housing for them to go. This petition has been signed by a number of residents of Cambridge, Norwood and Selden Streets in Halifax-Chebucto, and I have signed it also.
The petition is tabled. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition with the operative clause reading. We, the undersigned residents of Daly Road, 3rd Street and Wallace Road, respectfully request the Nova Scotia Government, through the Department of Public Works, repave these roads as they've been rapidly deteriorating in order to ensure the safety of residents living in the area. There are 38 signatures, and I've affixed my own.
The petition is tabled. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg leave to table a bill with a petition with the operative clause reading. We, the undersigned, as residents of Daly Road, New Victoria, respectfully request the Nova Scotia Government, through the Department of Public Works, to pave Daly Road as is in such bad condition and rapidly deteriorating to ensure the safety of residents living in the area. There are 15 signatures on this petition, and I have affixed my own as per rules of the House.
The petition is tabled. I recognize the honourable member of Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition with the operative clause reading. We, the undersigned residents of Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier, request the Department of Public Works, Nova Scotia, repave Gardner Road to ensure the safety of drivers and pedestrians. There are 23 signatures on this petition. I'm going to fix my own as per rules of the House.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. I recognize the Honorable Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 455, an act to establish a Department of Emergency Management and authorize the establishment of the Nova Scotia Guard. Bill number 459, an act respecting the continuation of certain health professional associations. And Bill number 464, an act respecting stronger workplaces for Nova Scotia. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendment.
Ordered that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. I recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to table two documents related to a member statement I'll be making later.
Please do. The report is tabled. I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you. I would like to table a document with respect to a later member's statement. This is a Canadian Press article from August 8th. Report shows average rent in Halifax up 18% since last year.
The report is tabled. I recognize the Honourable Member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to table a document that will be relevant in my member statement.
The document is tabled. As Speaker of the House of Assembly and pursuant to Section 163 of the Elections Act, I am tabling the following reports. Report of the Chief Electoral Officer on the proceedings of the Pictou West by-election, May 21st, 2024, statements of votes and statistics, and the annual report 2023-2024 for the period of April 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2024. Statements by ministers. I recognize the Honourable Minister for Acadian Affairs and Francophonie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I beg leave to make a couple of introductions.
Please do.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'aimerais tout d'abord souhaiter la bienvenue aujourd'hui à quelques représentants de la Fédération acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse. I'd like to welcome and recognize a few members of the Fédération acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse who are here today for an important day for the Acadian and Francophone community of Nova Scotia. So, la Présidente, the President Denise Comeau des Hôtels, le Directeur Général, the Executive Director Jules Chiasson, le Directeur Général Adjoint, the Assistant Executive Director Emmanuel Naimana, la Directrice de Communication, the Communications Director Melody Jaco-Parat, as well as a familiar face to this legislature, the MP for West Nova, Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, the former MLA for Argyll and Argyll-Barrington, former Minister of Acadian Affairs, Chris Antoine.
Thank you for coming. We hope you enjoy your time. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Canadian Affairs and Francophonie.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. L'année dernière, le Premier ministre a proclamé le mois d'août comme le mois du patrimoine acadien, afin de rendre hommage à plus de 400 ans d'histoire, de culture, de langue et de tradition acadienne et de célébrer les contributions sociales, économiques et culturelles de la communauté acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Ce fut un moment de grande fierté pour moi en tant que fier acadien. Je comprends l'importance de célébrer notre patrimoine et de célébrer et de partager les histoires incroyables de notre peuple qui a joué un rôle fondamental dans l'évolution de notre province. Les couleurs de l'Acadie ont été fièrement exposées tout au long du premier mois du patrimoine acadien de la Nouvelle-Écosse, dont le thème était Acadie, découvrez notre histoire vivante. Ce mois nous a donné l'occasion de mettre en valeur la vitalité de notre communauté et de célébrer notre fierté culturelle. Il représente également l'engagement de notre gouvernement à renforcer ces partenariats avec les organismes acadiens et francophones, à élaborer des politiques telles que notre stratégie provinciale d'immigration francophone, à adopter des lois telles que la loi sur le Conseil scolaire acadien provincial, à promouvoir la culture et le patrimoine acadien, à soutenir les projets communautaires et à célébrer les contributions et les réalisations du peuple et des communautés acadiennes dans l'ensemble de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Le projet de loi que je présenterai dans quelques minutes est une nouvelle preuve de cet engagement. Je ne pouvais pas parler des réalisations de la communauté acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse sans mentionner l'incroyable succès du Congrès mondial acadien 2024, qui s'est déroulé dans le sud-ouest de la Nouvelle-Écosse il y a quelques semaines. Pendant 9 jours, des milliers de personnes du monde entier ont célébré la fierté, la force et la résilience de la communauté acadienne. Et comme on le dirait en bon français, c'était vraiment chic à faire. Mais je n'ai jamais été aussi fier. Madame la Présidente, c'est avec une immense fierté que je reconnais la collaboration et le dévouement de la communauté acadienne et francophone de la Nouvelle-Écosse, ainsi que l'excellent travail accompli pour faire du premier mois du patrimoine acadien un succès. Que la devise du peuple acadien, « L'union fait la force », reste toujours vraie. Vive l'Acadie! Madam Speaker, last year the Premier proclaimed August to be Acadian Heritage Month, honoring more than 400 years of Acadian history, culture, language, and traditions, and to celebrate the social, economical, and cultural contributions of Nova Scotia's Acadian community. It was a very proud moment for me as an Acadian. I understand the importance of celebrating our heritage and sharing the incredible stories of our people who have played a fundamental role in shaping our province. The colours of Acadie were proudly on display throughout Nova Scotia's first Acadian Heritage Month, which had the theme of Acadie, Discover Our Vibrant History. The month provided us the opportunity to showcase our community's enduring vitality and celebrate our cultural pride. It also represents a commitment by our government to strengthen its partnerships with Acadian and Francophone organizations, develop policies like our province's Francophone immigration strategy, pass legislation like the Conseil scolaire acadien provincial Act, promote Acadian culture and heritage, provide support for community projects, and celebrate the contributions and achievements of Acadian people and communities throughout Nova Scotia. The bill I will introduce in a few minutes is further evidence of that commitment. I couldn't talk about the achievements of Nova Scotia's Acadian community without mentioning the incredible successful Congrès mondial acadien 2024 that took place in southwestern Nova Scotia a few weeks ago. Over 9 days, thousands of people from around the world celebrated the pride, strength, and resiliency of the Acadian community, and I've never been prouder. Madam Speaker, it is with immense pride that I recognize the collaboration and the dedication of Nova Scotia's Acadian and Francophone communities and the excellent work to make the first Acadian Heritage Month a success. May the motto of the Acadian people, L'union fait la force, strength through unity, always remain true. Vive l'Acadie.
Government's note, hello. I recognize the honourable member for Clare.
Madame la Présidente, je souhaite prendre un moment pour reconnaître et célébrer les incroyables contributions de notre communauté acadienne. Le mois de la patrimoine acadienne est l'occasion parfaite de réfléchir à l'histoire et à la culture et aux traditions riches que les Acadiens ont apportées à notre province. C'est encourageant de voir comment la communauté acadienne continue de grandir et de prospérer, tout en restant fidèle à ses racines. En tant qu'Acadien moi-même, je sais à quel point nous sommes très profondément fiers de notre patrimoine. L'engagement des communautés acadiennes et francophones de la Nouvelle-Écosse à préserver et à promouvoir notre culture est véritablement inspirant. Madame la Présidente, l'esprit acadien est un esprit de force et d'unité, et c'est avec cet esprit que nous avançons, célébrons Célébrant le passé, tout en construisant ensemble un avenir encore plus brillant. Vive l'Acadie. Madam Speaker, I want to take this moment to recognize and celebrate the incredible contributions of our Acadian community. Acadian Heritage Month was and is a wonderful time to reflect on the rich history, culture, and the traditions that Acadians have brought to our province. It's heartening to see how the community has continued to grow and thrive, and while staying true to its roots. As an Acadian myself, I know how deeply proud we are of our heritage. The commitment shown by Acadian and Francophone communities across Nova Scotia to preserve and promote our culture is truly inspiring. Madam Speaker, the Acadian spirit is one of strength and unity, and it's with the same spirit that we move forward, celebrating the past while building an even brighter future together. Vive l'Acadie. Merci, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je suis heureuse de prendre la parole aussi pour souligner également le premier mois de patrimoine acadien célébré en août dernier. Le mois de patrimoine acadien sera une occasion permanente de célébrer les contributions des Acadiens depuis plus de 400 ans et de considérer et célébrer les contributions sociales, économiques et culturelles de la communauté acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Réapprendre et reconsidérer de nouveau notre histoire collective est une étape essentielle pour aller de l'avant, à la fois pour soutenir la communauté acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse et nos communautés francophones, et surtout dans le but de continuer à développer les services et la force des communautés acadiennes et francophones. J'ai déjà eu la chance au sein de cette assemblée de parler du formidable Congrès mondial acadien qui a été une joyeuse célébration de famille et de communauté. Madame la Présidente, j'ai hâte d'examiner le prochain projet de loi visant à soutenir les communautés acadiennes et francophones de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Madam Speaker, I am also pleased to rise to recognize the first Acadian Heritage Month, marked this past August. Acadian Heritage Month will be an ongoing opportunity to celebrate the contributions of Acadians over more than 400 years, and to consider and celebrate the social, economic, and cultural contributions of Nova Scotia's Acadian community. Relearning and reconsidering our collective histories is an important step for moving forward, both to support the Acadian community of Nova Scotia, as well as our Francophone communities, and especially with the goal of continuing to grow the services and strength of the Francophone community. I had the chance previously to talk about the amazing Congrès mondial acadien, which was a joyful celebration of family and community. Madam Speaker, I look forward to considering the coming piece of legislation to support Acadian and Francophone communities across Nova Scotia.
I call a brief recess. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, I think you'll find that we have unanimous consent of the House to extend daily routine until 2:10.
There has been a request to extend daily routine till 2:10. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary minded? Request is granted. Okay, we're moving on. Actually, I'd like to start off, I would like to acknowledge the members of the New Ross chapter of 4-H who are joining us in the Speaker's Gallery. 4-H is a youth organization dedicated to developing life skills and promoting agriculture awareness for members aged 7 to 21. The 4-H's stand for Head, Health, Heart, and Hands, and their motto is Learn to Do by Doing. This is done through engaging members in fun projects involving making things, learning processes, and visiting places with friends, including here today. The New Ross 4-H has been in existence for over 80 years, has about 25 members, is the only one in the municipality of Chester, and I think with members at the head of the bay as well. Actually, I know with members at the head of the bay. Recently, they had a session with members where they learned about Robert's Rules of Order. Today, they can see how these rules apply in our legislature. Joining us are Hayden Broom, Mark Broom, Bentley Davis, Katie Hurdle, Lexi McDowell, Sherry Davis, and Andalyn Countway. I would ask all to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House. They're a great group. Thank you for coming. Government notice of motions. I recognize the Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today, September 10th, is World Suicide Prevention Day, a day to bring focused attention to this complex issue, reducing stigma and raising awareness, and share the message that suicides are preventable. Whereas suicide touches the lives of many Nova Scotians and every death by suicide is a tragic loss. And whereas government remains committed to creating a universal mental health and addiction system, one that will not only respond when people are in crisis, but will also provide better access to services and support people need to stay well. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize September 10th as World Suicide Prevention Day, and join me in reminding all Nova Scotians who are suffering that they are not alone and help is available. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried. Introduction of bills. I recognize the Honourable Minister for Natural Resources.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act respecting advancing Nova Scotia opportunities. The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Advancing Nova Scotia Opportunities.
Bill 471, an act respecting advancing Nova Scotia opportunities.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future date. I recognize the Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Improve the Seniors Care Grant.
The Honourable Member of Yarmouth begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Improve the Seniors Care Grant.
Bill 472, an act to improve the Seniors Care Grant.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future date. I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Ensure Healthcare Accountability and Transparency.
The honourable member begs of Dartmouth North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Ensure Healthcare Accountability and Transparency.
Bill 473, an act to ensure healthcare accountability and transparency.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future date. I recognize the honourable member of Cumberland North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And may I make an introduction before I read my bill?
Please do.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I'd like to welcome and introduce many mothers and family members, mothers who are working for compassionate and collaborative mental health care here in Nova Scotia. And as I say their names, I'd ask you to please rise. Nancy Saunders and Ernie Brennan, Ketch Harbour. Karen Saunders, Bryson of Tantallon. Angela Saunders from Truro. Janice McEwen, Ketch Harbour. Carolyn Wood, Ketch Harbour. Sienna Brackett, Ketch Harbour. Sheila Burke, Duncan's Cove. Kelly Mitchell and her mom, Lavina Nickerson of Yarmouth. Michelle and Brian Hare of Lower Sackville. Cindy and Dennis Corbett and their son, Jotham Corbett, and his girlfriend Jocelyn from Windsor Junction. Heather and Danny Spidell from St. Margaret's Bay. Bev Cadam from Eastern Shore. Sari Minichello. Brenda Conboy. And Tina Kidd of Dartmouth.
Brenda Conboy in your Applebee's.
My phone's speaking. And Tina Kidd of Dartmouth. Welcome to the People's House. This is your house.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
The honourable member for Cumberland North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
Bill 474, an act to amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
I recognize the honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill called An Act to Improve Mental Health Services.
The honourable member for Clayton Park West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Improve Mental Health Services.
Bill 475, an act to improve mental health services.
I recognize the honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je désire déposer un projet de loi intitulé La loi modifiant le chapitre 26 des lois de 2004, la loi sur les services en France. Madam Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 26 of the Acts of 2004, the French Language Services Act.
The Honourable Minister for Service Nova Scotia begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 26 of the Acts of 2004 and French Language Service Act.
Bill 476, an act to amend Chapter 26 of the Acts of 2004, the French Language Services Act, loi modifiant le chapitre 26 des lois de 2004, la loi sur les services en français.
Ordered that the bill and previous bill be read a second time on a future day. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Establish Mobile Care Teams for Mental Health.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish Mobile Care Teams for Mental Health.
Bill 477, an act to establish mobile care teams for mental health.
Notices of motion. Oh, sorry, order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. Statement by members. I recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I begin, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please do.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the East Gallery, I am honored and pleased to introduce a number of people involved with the Sackville Sports Heritage Hall of Fame. Joining us today are Cheryl Dempster and Daryl Dempster, and I'd ask them to rise. Janet Ferguson and Steve Ferguson. Wade Lively and Rhonda Hines. Daryl Jessam and Pam Jessam, who are also the parents of the honorable member for Hammonds Plains Lucasville. Anne Louise Kerr, and Glenn Reed and Lucille Reed. I would like to ask you to accept the warm wishes and welcome by the House of Assembly here.
I recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to thank the board members of the Sackville Sports Heritage Hall of Fame Society in Lower Sackville. Every year, the board works diligently to select recipients to be inducted into the Sackville Sports Heritage Hall of Fame, with some of the board members being inductees themselves. They appreciate the importance of recognizing those who have made a significant contribution in the past. Members of the Hall of Fame have excelled in various levels of competition themselves, as athletes, coaches, officials, and builders. Madam Speaker, I would ask that all members of the House of Assembly join me in thanking the Sackville Sports Heritage Hall of Fame board members, Daryl Dempster, Anne Louise Kerr, Ross Sampson, Steve Ferguson, Daryl Jessam, Wade Lively, Adam Lucas, Samantha Paszkowski, Glenn Reed, Crystal Spence, and Chris Speardykes for their dedication and commitment to the sports community. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Today is World Suicide Prevention Day, a day to reflect on the urgent need for drastic improvements to mental health supports and services here in Nova Scotia. Too many families in our province have been impacted by the heartbreaking loss of a loved one to suicide. We are all familiar with stories in this chamber that have impacted families in our own communities. In this house today, we're joined by mothers, fathers, family members, and friends who have faced this unimaginable tragedy in their own families and in their own circles. Their courage in sharing their stories and advocating for change is a reminder that we must do more to ensure mental health services are accessible, responsive, and preventative. Early intervention, access, and awareness can really make the difference in saving lives. As legislators, we have the responsibility to make the needed legislative, regulatory, and policy changes, along with improved investments to continually improve our mental health services and supports for families so we can do a better job protecting lives in this province. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to mark World Suicide Prevention Day. We know and must reiterate today that one life lost to suicide is one too many. We stand with the families and the mothers here today in remembering those who suffered too much and are gone too soon. We commit to redoubling our efforts to ensure that people can access the care that they need when they need it, starting with the Nova Scotia Suicide Prevention Strategy. We also commit to continuing to talk about the tragedy of suicide inside and outside of this chamber and to break the stigma that so often prevents people from accessing care and families from being able to help. If anyone is having thoughts of self-harm, please reach out to friends, family, health professionals, or to the National Suicide Crisis Helpline by calling 988.
I recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay Dominion.
Madam Speaker, as the weather begins to change, I think of the thousands of teachers, support staff, and administrators who are back in the classroom. So many lesson plans have been completed and tweaked. Classrooms have been converted to welcome environments, and students have been welcomed back. All the preparation meetings have led to excellent school openings across the province. But in addition to the delivering lessons, our professional teachers bring valuable skills to many community organizations. Food banks, art groups, church groups, and planning committees, teachers impact our lives in a very positive way. And from youth groups to sport teams, our teaching staff serve as positive role models, providing valuable life skills to our youth in and out of the classroom. With the celebration of International Literacy Day this past weekend, I want to extend a very special thank you to all of our professional staff for doing so much work in our communities and making our communities a better place to live. I'd like to wish all an enjoyable and successful 2024-2025 school year.
I recognize the honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to make an introduction, and it has been introduced, but I would like Nancy Saunders.
Order, please, please do.
Okay, sorry. In the gallery, we are joined by Nancy Saunders and Ernie Brennan, Nancy's sisters, Angela and Karen, and many of their friends from Ketch Harbour. Madam Speaker, I deeply admire their strength and commitment and what Nancy and Ernie are doing in changing this unimaginable tragedy of losing their son and turning it into an advocacy to help so many others. So please welcome them again to the House.
I recognize the honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge the incredible strength and resilience of Nancy Saunders and Ernie Brennan from Ketch Harbour. After the heartbreaking loss of their son, Ben Brennan, in 2023, their lives were forever changed. Nancy was unable to get Ben the help she needed due to our privacy laws. She was unable to provide important information to the health providers, unable to get him an appointment, unable to change an appointment, and she was not notified of his release from the hospital. In Ben's memory, Nancy and Ernie have become strong advocates to ensure that no other family endures this loss. Madam Speaker, I ask the House to join me in welcoming Nancy, Ernie, Angela, and Karen, and many of their friends to the House today. Let's honor Ben's memory by supporting those who need it most in our communities. And thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Please do.
I'd like to introduce Michelle and Brian Hare, as well as Tina Kidd, and I'll ask them to stand once more.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As part of the Nova Scotia Moms advocating for compassionate and collaborative mental health care, Michelle and Brian Hare of Lower Sackville are here with us today. Michelle and Brian lost their son, Cameron, age 26, to suicide in 2023. They tried to get help for their son, but without a family physician, it made it near impossible. The stigma against mental illness and the knowledge of the horrific experiences of those who go to the ER departments in mental health distress kept their son from going to the local ER. As a Nova Scotia Health employee, Cameron also felt that he would have no privacy going to the local ER. Michelle and her husband advocate for compassionate and collaborative care, mental health care. Tina Kidd is a mom advocating also. Tina lost her son, Devin Kidd, only 6 months ago. Devin died from a drug overdose after several suicide attempts, many trips to the hospital, 5 times in a 2-week period in February. Each time he was sent home, there was no conversation with family, and he was left to deal with his mental illness, crisis, and addiction on his own. Madam Speaker, today I thank them for being here and remind each one of us that the laws of this land and the laws of this province are made by us and us alone in collaboration with the people of Nova Scotia, and I thank them for coming.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to talk about the efforts of Kelly Mitchell and her family following the loss of her daughter. Kelly lost her 14-year-old daughter, Aiden, to suicide. After noticing a dire lack of resources available to young people in Yarmouth, Kelly founded a nonprofit youth center in Yarmouth called Aiden's Place to support youth wellness and advocate for collaborative, compassionate mental health care. Kelly bought a house and painted it purple, the color of Aiden's room. Throughout the week, youth between the ages of 9 and 17 can use Aiden's Place as a safe space to learn life skills and get involved in programs that give back to the community. Aiden's Place has offered nightly suppers, and Mitchell's also made breakfast and lunch boxes. They collect clothing and handbags of supplies from their porch if they have more than they need for the community to take from. Kelly wants systemic changes so that families like hers can help their loved ones when they need help, and that they never have to experience the tragedy that her family has. Madam Speaker, I ask all members in the gallery in the Assembly to extend our sympathy to Kelly and to her friends and thank her for her ongoing dedication to supporting Nova Scotian youth.
I recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to recognize the following Strait Regional Centre for Education teachers who received Educator Impact Awards. Gay Middleton is a primary grade 1 teacher at East Richmond Education Centre. She designs instructional strategies and learning activities that meets the needs of her students to help grow their literacy skills. Jennifer Birch teaches a grade 3-4 integrated English language arts and reading recovery at Felix Marchand Education Centre. She creates a safe space for her students, developing activities to support students in their learning journey. Sean Kennedy teaches at Richmond Education Centre and Academy. He gets to know his students, set clear expectations, and asks students to demonstrate what they have learned, fostering an engaged classroom. In honor of International Literacy Day this past Sunday, I ask all members of this legislature to please join me in congratulating these SRCE teachers who demonstrate educator excellence. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Congrats on your new gig. And today on World Mental Health Day, I'd like to just acknowledge that when Nova Scotians and people put in the work and the time to put forward good ideas that are supported by professionals from the health community, from the legal community, and from people with lived experience, that we do our part as legislators to listen and to act to create changes that will improve the abilities for people to fight mental health as a disease. And I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize Heather Spidell, who has been a friend and a tremendous advocate, someone who's influenced me to get up here and speak about how important it is to support people that are dealing with mental health care battles. And she's a grieving aunt of her nephew Adam, who leaves behind a beautiful family. And it's up to us to do our part so that folks like Adam have the tools to be successful in their struggles, to get through it and live their lives happily and successfully. So thank you all for being here today.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, could I say a word of introduction?
Please do.
Thank you. Well, it's a wonderful warm day for us in the House that we're able to welcome this afternoon Evan Louise Hornbeck, the newborn daughter of Evie Hornbeck. Evie, who is on maternity leave from her position in communications with the NDP caucus. Evan was born in May, and though her mother has been here in the House many times, this is Evan's first visit to the House of Assembly.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax, Needham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to recognize that September 10th is World Suicide Prevention Day. Today, I stand to raise awareness about the importance of reducing stigma and to encourage open conversations to prevent suicides. Changing the narrative on suicide is about transforming how we perceive this complex issue and shifting from a culture of silence and stigma to one of openness, understanding, and support. Every conversation, no matter how small, contributes to a supportive, understanding society. I would like all members of this House to join me in encouraging everyone to start the conversation on suicide and suicide prevention so we can break down barriers and raise awareness and create better cultures of support.
I recognize the honourable member for Sackville-Uniacke.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I want to take time today to extend birthday wishes to someone who's become very dear to me over the past 12 years. My stepdaughter, Olivia Myra Claire Hewitt, is celebrating her 25th birthday today. Speaker, over the years, Olivia and I've had a lot of ups and downs, but we've grown to become really good friends. I'm proud of the woman that she's become. And she's actually living one of her dreams today. It was to attend Fashion Week in New York City for her 25th birthday, where her and her brother Jesse are right now. And Speaker, I'm anxious for the two of them to get back so that I can hear how everything in the Big Apple went, as well as so we can eat cake. So I'd like to ask all the members of the legislature in joining me today and wishing Olivia a very happy 25th birthday. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Sydney, member 2.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, today I met Sheila Burke from Duncan's Cove. And Sheila's 29-year-old son, Luke, died of suicide in 2018. And in talking to Sheila today, she tells me that Luke was diagnosed as suicidal but released. In her advocacy for her son, the journey, she has felt ignored and dismissed and powerless at times to help her son through his journey. Sheila wants the changes proposed by the Nova Scotia moms so that other families do not have to go through the excruciating pain that she suffers every day. To Sheila and to everyone here, my heart is with you. So many families have been impacted by suicide, and ensuring that the supports were there. I came here today not thinking I would be doing this member statement, but I met her, and it's an honor to meet her. It was a privilege to meet her, and I'm honored to stand on my feet to advocate not only on her behalf for her son, but for families across the province.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you. I'm going to speak to a different subject than the previous speaker. Madam Speaker, all MLAs, particularly government MLAs, ought to have been gobsmacked by the report issued just a couple of weeks ago by rentals.ca, which showed that average rent in Halifax has increased to $2,378, an average increase of 18%. Data released in the report indicates that the average one-bedroom in Halifax is now $2,050, the average two-bedroom $2,680, the average three-bedroom $3,170. Halifax's 18% average rent increase is more than 12 percentage points greater than the Canadian average. Halifax's 18% average rent increase is 13 percentage points above the rent cap of 5%, which is clearly failing in its only purpose to curtail rent increases in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The Congrès Mondial Acadien 2024 proved to be a very busy, fun, and exciting time in Southwest Nova Scotia with an abundance of events to take part in. A special event was the production La Voix de la Mer, written by singer, songwriter, playwright, and producer and former high school teacher of mine, Yvette D'Entremont of West Pumlico. Yvette has been writing and producing musicals for the past 30 years and has won numerous accolades. She had the honor of presenting her 2013 musical La Voix de la Mer, where her music and artistic works reflected her energy, her passion for the people, and life in a fishing village. Surrounding communities can relate to this production, depicting the life of fishers and families forever linked to the sea despite the misfortunes that can happen. I ask that all members of the House join me in congratulating Yvette D'Entremont, her cast and crew on a fantastic production during the Congrès Mondial Acadien 2024. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A little while ago, we were introduced to Windsor Junction residents, Cindy and Dennis Corbett, and their son Jotham Corbett and his girlfriend Jocelyn, and I'm so glad that they're with us here today. Madam Speaker, Jotham Corbett of Windsor Junction lives with schizophrenia. He supports the changes the Nova Scotia mums are advocating for. Jotham knows how important it is to have a family advocating for him. He also knows it's important to have collaboration between the health system and families when a loved one is experiencing symptoms that prevent them from being able to help themselves. Now, Jotham has publicly shared his story and has joined the Nova Scotia moms in their advocacy. I'll note that Jotham was very fortunate. He did provide consent to share information, and he credits the love and support of his family and the collaboration between his family and the Nova Scotia Early Psychosis Program with saving his life. I want to thank him for his candor and for coming forward today and other days to ensure we hear his story. Thank you, Jotham.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is with deep concern this summer and again on the weekend I learned the Miners Museum was being denied entry into the family of Nova Scotia museums. The museum is home to the world-renowned Men of the Deeps. This choir tours the province, country, and world, sharing their experiences of working in the pit. It tells stories through friendships, the strikes, the history, all woven into a human experience. The province's Miners Memorial Day is in fact William Davis Day, named for a man murdered during the 1925 strike. That history is in the Glace Bay Miners Museum. The museum is unique in that it offers underground tours to visitors. The tours goes under the Atlantic Ocean where miners worked for generations. During the tour, visitors learn that the French opened the first mine. So, Madam Speaker, the uniqueness of the Miners Museum, the rich history it provides, it is reason enough to give it entry into the Nova Scotia Museum and provide more funding. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Kings North.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize and congratulate Kentville's Kings County Museum building as they celebrate the 120-year milestone anniversary this year. The Kings County Museum building was designed by noted architect Leslie Farron, and the building opened its doors in 1904 as the Kings County Courthouse and the administrative center of the municipality of the County of Kings. In 1980, the Kings Historical Society took over the building and began operating it as a museum. It houses a collection of more than 25,000 physical artifacts and archives, including an extensive textile collection and a genealogy department. The museum attracts many researchers and provides a good place to educate young people and adds to the community character and charm of Kentville. Please join me today to congratulate the Kings County Museum as they celebrate their building's 120th anniversary. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Armdale.
Madam Speaker, I would like to recognize the outstanding work of Cowie Hill Care Center for its commitment to provide high-quality care and education to young children in Halifax-Arundel. Madam Speaker, we know how important it is to educate our future generation in this province. Therefore, I ask members of this House to join me in thanking Cowie Hill Care Center for their valuable contribution to our province. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Madam Speaker, in response to last month's Health Committee on the connection between housing and health care, the Investment Property Owners Association of Nova Scotia wrote a letter that was made public today, and I tabled it earlier. The letter accuses a witness at the committee meeting of providing a, quote, biased, unfair, and incomplete, end quote, account of the connection between fixed-term leases and homelessness. Witness Sherry Lecker, the Executive Director of ADSIM for Women and Children, said at the meeting, again, quote, we have to look at what some of the pathways are into homelessness or into an experience of not being housed. There are some pathways that could be closed. Until they're closed, we are going to continue to see people who are experience rent evictions or evictions, and a great many people are losing their housing due to fixed term leases, end quote. I would think that someone with 20 years of experience would know what she speaks when it comes to these matters. And further, I would suggest that most people in the province agree with the wisdom of ending the pathways to homelessness. I would like to add my name to that list of people. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On August 23rd, a change of command ceremony was held at 14 Wing Greenwood to welcome the new base commander, Colonel Luc Vachon, and bid a fond farewell to outgoing base commander, Colonel Jeff Davis. I was pleased to join many from the community and those in uniform as this grand military tradition played out inside one of the beautiful hangars on base. The ceremony was a reminder of the rich history of the Royal Canadian Air Force, which continues to celebrate its 100th anniversary. As the MLA representing CFB Greenwood, I would like to wish Colonel Jeff Davis all the best as he takes on his new assignment and thank him for his contributions to not only the military base, but also the surrounding community. I'd also like to welcome Colonel Vachon to our community. I look forward to working with him to continue to strengthen the ties between 14 Wing Greenwood and the greater community of Kings West. Madam Speaker, I'm honored to represent those in uniform from CFB Greenwood here in this House, and I again want to thank them for their service to our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Kings South.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to commemorate the extraordinary life of Michael Bawtry, who passed away on August 24th. A visionary and cultural force, Michael's contribution to the arts in Nova Scotia are immeasurable. As the founding artistic director of the Atlantic Theatre Festival, he left an indelible mark on theatre in this province, bringing creativity and passion to every project that he touched. Michael's career spanned the globe, but it was here in Nova Scotia where his influences are deeply felt. From his work at Acadia University to his community initiatives like the revitalization of the Wolfville Legion and his contributions to the Wolfville Historical Society, Michael's dedication to both theatre and community will be remembered. Michael performed in this very building, playing the role of Joseph Howe, and also toured schools with his book, Joe Howe to the Rescue. His legacy lives on in the lives he touched and the projects he nurtured. I ask all members of the House of Assembly to join me in recognizing and celebrating the remarkable life of Michael Bawtry. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On today, World Suicide Prevention Day, I have to say how honored I was to be able to work with the families, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, and support people here today as they held a press conference trying to draw attention to the needed legislative changes around mental health care here in the province of Nova Scotia. It's a very somber day. It's a moment, it's a day to remember those we have lost, to support those who are struggling, and to renew our commitment to mental health and well-being. On this important day, we are reminded of the urgent need for compassion, for understanding, and effective support systems. Today, Nova Scotia moms advocating for compassionate, collaborative mental health care are asking us to make changes, asking for legislative changes, balancing laws between the protection of privacy and protection of life. Madam Speaker, I believe there's nothing more powerful than mothers who are determined to make this change. It's nonpartisan, Madam Speaker, and I call us all to join together to make the needed changes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Madam Speaker, the food bank at the former St. Peter's Church, now a chapter of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, was unique in its mission. It delivered food to people in need in Dartmouth 5 days a week. Unfortunately, the food bank was legally dissolved this past April of 2024. After running the bank for 30 years, the main organizers decided it was time to retire. My office, and I'm sure others, regularly referred constituents to the food bank, especially those who were in a food emergency and had mobility issues. If the request came in before 11 a.m., the delivery of food could be made on the same day. We know that food banks are not the solution to the food insecurity. Living wages, higher income assistance rates, affordable housing, among other things, are the solutions. But in the meantime, food banks play an important role in feeding Nova Scotians. I ask this House to join me in thanking all of the volunteers that ran the St. Peter's Church Food Bank over the course of decades. It was an invaluable service, and it is missed.
We have 17 seconds left. Does anyone think they can get a member statement in? Order. Orders of the day, oral questions put by members to the ministers. I recognize the honourable leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it has never been more expensive to live in this province. Our rental increases are the highest in the country. Power bills have been shooting through the roof, and the cost of groceries is pushing families to the brink, Madam Speaker. Just between April and June of this year, 36,000 individuals in Nova Scotia had to receive support from Feed Nova Scotia, according to the Executive Director, Nick Jennery. Madam Speaker, we know that food insecurity and financial pressures increase the mental health challenges that people deal with. My question to the Premier is, does he not see, considering this food insecurity challenge, that it would have been a better idea to put food on the table for our kids than give $1 million to the Sobeys Corporation?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance and Treasury Board.
Madam Speaker, what I would say is look at the school lunch program. A first for this province. It's just one example, but it's an important example of how we're helping Nova Scotians with the cost of living. It will make a difference for young people. Young people coming to school need to be able to learn at school. And if they're not able to come with the nutrition they need, they're going to be able to get it with the new school lunch program. So, Madam Speaker, I think that's something that the opposition should acknowledge. It's something that never happened before, but it happened under this government.
I recognize the Leader of the Official Opposition with his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the majority of provinces are moving forward with this. This is something we advocated for, and the government should actually make that program free for Nova Scotians like we've advocated for. Madam Speaker, poverty rates and food insecurity are shooting through the roof here in Nova Scotia. We have the highest rates in the country. Groceries are becoming more and more unaffordable for working families, and the Premier's Nova Scotia Loyal program, which was intended and advertised to put more local food on the tables of Nova Scotians, has proved to be nothing more than a corporate giveaway to his friends and allies in the Sobeys Corporation. Madam Speaker, does the Premier not see that giving taxpayers' money would have been better used to an organization like Feed Nova Scotia than actually giving it to one of the highest profiting companies in Atlanta?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I know that our government has given, in just this past year, about $10 million to all kinds of organizations around the province to help them help Nova Scotians feed themselves. Madam Speaker, there are all kinds of volunteers out there doing this work. We believe it's our role to help support them. And I can tell you, these groups are all over the province. They're in just about every community around the province. Some of them have their own kitchens, but the funding that we're giving them is helping them, whether they need support with those kitchens, with capital improvements, or whether it's support to actually procure food to prepare to give meals out to people who need them.
I recognize the honourable leader for the official opposition with his final supplementary.
And not once does the Minister of Finance defend the Nova Scotia Loyal Program or the taxpayers' money that's gone to the Sobeys Corporation instead of going into organizations that help put food on the tables for Nova Scotians. Since the Minister of Finance won't defend that investment in the Nova Scotia Loyal Program, will he commit to taking that money back and giving it to the organizations that need it most and that are actually doing the job of putting more local food on the tables for kids in our province?
I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And obviously what the member is leaving out of the discussion is there are multiple parts to the Nova Scotia Loyal. He's zeroed in on one. There'll be other vendors that participate as we grow with the party. But let's not lose sight of the goal here, and that is to promote Nova Scotia products, to be loyal to Nova Scotia. We have some great vendors here. We produce great products. We want to spotlight those. We want to profile them, and it's a good thing that's happening. It's a new initiative. It's a big initiative, and big new things are hard, but we're persistent. But I will tell you, even at this stage, the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, they're in support of what we're doing. In fact, they said it's time to adopt a unified, nonpartisan approach that focuses on developing Nova Scotia-made solutions. That is what the Nova Scotia Loyal is all about.
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the NDP.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our 5% rent cap is the highest in the country. Even so, some of Halifax's largest landlords report double-digit operating income growth in the first quarter of this year. These profits were largely driven up by unit turnover, where fixed-term leases means there is no limit to the rental increase allowed. In response, this government is working to make evictions faster and easier while protecting these profits. I'd like to ask the Premier, how is this a balanced approach?
I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and we are trying to strike a balance there. Of course, you know, the member is focused on the landlord part of it, but these tenants are also neighbors. We want good neighbors in these buildings too. When somebody's being evicted, oftentimes it can be because they're not a good neighbor. So we're trying to find this balance here. The best way to tackle the cost of living, the best way to tackle the housing crisis is more housing, driving down the price of housing, driving down the price of rental. That's why we're bringing down barriers to home construction. And I'll tell you, Madam Speaker, our plan is working. Housing starts are up. Our goal is 40,000 new homes. We're on track. We're building new homes. There's more homes today than there was in 2020 when we'll continue with our plan, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the Honourable Leader for the NDP.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Most people in this province are being evicted because there is a financial incentive to do so. With an 18.2% increase in rental costs year over year, the 30% of Nova Scotians who rent are desperate for some relief. They need rent control that is tied to the unit so that that financial incentive to evict them every 12 months goes away. What is the Premier's message to renters, students, healthcare workers, families, seniors who are struggling to keep up with these increasing costs?
I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the solution is more housing, more opportunities to rent different places. This is why we're focused on building more housing across the spectrum: student housing, affordable housing, public housing for the first time in years. We're making investments to make sure that the housing stock goes up. But when we think about the affordability crisis and the struggles that people have, I would urge the members opposite, that if either party had a real concern about the cost of living, they would call on their federal cousins to scrap the carbon tax. That's a tax. That's a tax that will take $400 million out of the hands of Nova Scotians just this year alone, Madam Speaker. That is part of the solution. I asked them to call on their cousins to get rid of it.
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the NDP with her final supplementary.
The truth, Madam Speaker, beyond the partisan talking points, is that this government has failed to address the rapidly growing homeless population during their term. It has now quadrupled in the 3 years that they have been in office. And we have heard from advocates that fixed-term leases are a, quote, key pathway to homelessness. A key pathway to homelessness. And that until this flow is turned off, these numbers will continue to rise. Will this Premier commit today to tying this rent cap to the unit, ending the incentive to evict, and ensuring that people today can stay in their homes?
I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And unlike past Liberal and NDP governments, we're making record investments in the housing stock in this province. The Liberals simply refuse to invest. The NDP sat on literally tens of millions of dollars from the federal government and did nothing with it. Imagine where we'd be, Madam Speaker, if they would have made those investments. We're making those investments. But I just want to remind the members, none of these problems happened overnight. We didn't break it, but we're fixing it. And I'll just remind the member, I'll quote from former Nova Scotia NDP Cabinet Minister Maureen MacDonald. Maureen MacDonald said, "There are no overnight quick solutions to the affordability and homelessness problem, although the current situation is largely attributable to the policies of the federal Trudeau government."
Order. I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, two key promises made by this Premier to move our economy. One was the Nova Scotia Oil Program. He promised Nova Scotians that would contribute $1.4 billion to the GDP. Instead, we have a program where Nova Scotians can collect 50 scene points 12 weeks of the year, leading to an annual incentive of $6 every year. No wonder, Madam Speaker, you can't even buy a gallon of milk with that. No wonder we are now last place when it comes to our GDP. We have the lowest per capita of any province or state in North America. What is the Premier going to do to reverse this trend and get us out of last place on economic growth?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economics.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition is correct, and it is not a happy statistic. And it is one that goes back over decades and many different governments, as well, including those with whom he has served. Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is trying to minimize all that the Nova Scotia Loyal Initiative is. It is multifaceted, and I am proud of every piece of it. But he is conveniently neglecting the fact that we have made changes to procurement, among other initiatives, where Nova Scotia businesses are given a 10% advantage, points or price-wise, within trade limits. This is something to be proud of.
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
If the government thinks saving Nova Scotians $6 a year is something to be proud of, well, I guess that is setting the bar very low here, Madam Speaker. The other major economic promise that this government made, part of their economic plan, was a better paycheck guarantee. And instead of having a better paycheck guarantee, Nova Scotians have the lowest paychecks in Canada, Madam Speaker, and I'll table that. This is a Premier that has not been able to deliver better paychecks, that has overseen the worst economic growth in our country, and at the same time is trying to double the population, increasing costs on Nova Scotians for housing, services, goods, and everything. Does this Premier not see that his lack of initiative or his plan to double the population is actually creating more harm than good on working Nova Scotians?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have seen again and again the negativity of the opposition parties, and recently trying to cause fear and concern amongst Nova Scotians at a time when we have, and these are the words of including former Premier Stephen McNeil, that we have momentum and that we are growing and we are investing and we are moving the needle on our businesses, investing in productivity, in new equipment. Since making the innovation rebate program, we've approved 71 projects across the province, $236 million in productivity investments.
I recognize the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Madam Speaker, I wish the government was less concerned about what people are saying about them and more concerned about the facts and the challenges that Nova Scotians are dealing with. The lowest GDP growth in North America, and you wonder why. This government has no economic plan. They're blowing money, and we've seen this even with their subsidized foreign wine program that would have cost Nova Scotian taxpayers $6 to $12 million per year. However, in July, the government confirmed that they are on track to pay out more than $10 million a year in subsidies for foreign-produced wine to just 2 commercial bottlers who employ not as many people as the farm wine sector. Madam Speaker, my question to the Premier is it not evidence that this economic plan of this government is not working?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The fact is, our government cares a great deal what Nova Scotians have to say. And that is why on all of our programs and policies, we have gone to Nova Scotians, notably on Nova Scotia Loyal, where more than 10,000 Nova Scotians generously shared their time and their thoughts on where they shop, how they shop, and what incentives might be able to move them towards more local purchasing. Madam Speaker, this again, unless it is the opinion of the opposition leader that we should not be listening to Nova Scotians, it's time we give some new things a try.
I recognize the Honourable Leader of the official opposition with his final question.
Madam Speaker, the problem is that if you're a wealthy Nova Scotian with close political ties and donate to the Tory party, that's who gets listened to in this province primarily. And we've seen that with the wine subsidy program. That's a subsidy program that was paused but would have cost $10 million to taxpayers so that 2 bottling plants could have gotten up to $10 million. One of those individuals is very closely linked to the Premier and has fundraised for that Premier. Madam Speaker, does the Premier not think it would be better to be loyal to Nova Scotian wineries that are grown here and built here, draw tourists from around the world, and are major award winners than supporting factories who are bottling surplus fermented grapes imported from Australia and Chile?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, the member is talking about the wineries, and I think it's a pretty well-known fact that we're currently working with both commercial wineries and grape growers who produce their own wines in this province. So that's happening. But what I must point out for the member, I don't know if he's not seen this in the last few years, but we've seen some of the lowest rates of unemployment since the early 1970s in this province. And we've had some of the largest population influxes since the 1920s. Madam Speaker, people are coming here because there is opportunity in Nova Scotia.
I recognize the Honourable Member from King South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When millions of dollars of taxpayers' money are being used for government programs, Nova Scotians expect that their government knows what it's trying to achieve. We know from the farm wine industry that the commercial bottling program puts at risk 1,100 jobs and tens of millions of public and private investment. Will the Premier explain what the objectives of the commercial bottling program are?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, the member will know that that program was paused, and the support that's going out to both commercial wineries and grape growers is the same as it was before.
I recognize the honourable member for King South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So what we did not hear was any job creation associated with this $1 million program, any investment, any increases to buy local. No study went into this. We know that this is going to hurt industry and create nothing except either putting money into two friends' pockets or giving money to grape growers around the world, not local grape growers. Will the minister, while the Premier wants to use taxpayers' money to help his friends, will the minister stand up for local agriculture and rural jobs and demand the Premier to end the commercial bottling program? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, part of the work that's going on with both of these working groups is evaluating all of the data that they've put forward and that's been put forward in the past in terms of economic returns that both of these sectors provide to our Nova Scotian economy. There's no question they provide a return to the economy, Madam Speaker, and there's no question under all stripes of governments, both have gotten support from the province. And it should be pointed out, Madam Speaker, that the first government to support the commercial bottlers in this province was actually that member's government when he was part of it.
Order, order. Order. I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you. My question is for the Minister responsible for residential tenancies, who'd indicated in the last session of the House that when a decision was made for or against an enforcement unit for tenancies, that the consultant's report, which had recommended it, would be made public. So now that the decision against the enforcement unit has been made, will the minister, without diverting into his view of the pros and cons of such a unit, we're familiar with that, will he simply tell us when we will be able to see the report?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Now that we've made a decision as a government to not proceed with compliance enforcement unit, and again, I would caution the members of this House and others who have twisted, perhaps leaked versions or documents of that report. It did not recommend that government do so. It provided options for government to look at and examine. We examined those options. We conducted further evaluation across the country, and it would not meet the needs of tenants and landlords. So yes, we will be making that report public.
I recognize the Honourable Member of Halifax-Chebucto.
Well, I think this is an important commitment because the release of a consultant's report of this sort is really the most normal thing in the world, whatever its recommendations are. You know, the report is made public, the government acts on some of the recommendations, doesn't act on some of the others. The government, their work is judged relative to this, and this is how the whole thing goes. So that when a report is not put forward to the public, as this one hasn't been, people naturally assume there's something that the government doesn't want them to know, which they will continue to assume until that report is made public. So when is it that the government is going to put the report in the hands of the people of the province?
I recognize the Honourable Minister for Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'll have to get back to the member with an exact timeline. But again, and we'll have plenty of time to debate the legislation before the floor of the legislature, but I want to remind the member that the objectives I outlined in the Compliance and Enforcement Unit report by Davis Beer, the objectives, whether balancing the rights of tenants and landlords to ensure fairness and equity, promoting deterrence and early resolution, accessibility, and be able to act quickly and resolve emergency and high priority situations. These are all objectives that we are meeting through the amendments that we're bringing forward through the legislature, through the legislation rather, as well as internal process changes to improve the program, make it better and fairer for everyone. Thank you very much.
I recognize the honourable member for Annapolis.
Madam Speaker, the local farm wine industry has been very clear about what negative impacts the proposed commercial bottling subsidy offers. Nova Scotia's 20 farm wineries support more than 1,100 jobs, more than $250 million in direct economic impact every year, and I'll table that information. Instead of supporting this industry, the Premier has decided to support his friends who are commercial bottlers. My question to the Premier, will he commit today to not subsidizing commercial bottlers and instead focus on local farm wine producers?
I recognize the honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm surprised that suddenly the official opposition sees this as a program that should no longer exist, because it was them who started it when they were in government just a few years ago. So I don't understand why it was seemingly such a good idea back then to start it, and now they're saying to discontinue the program that they started.
I recognize the honourable member for Annapolis.
The difference is the exponential funding that's being proposed to commercial bottlers versus back then. Exponential difference. And I'm surprised the Minister of Agriculture won't answer these questions. Hasn't done so since the spring sitting. Nova Scotia has a booming wine tourism industry that brings almost $50 million a year to the province, and I've tabled that document. Tourists are coming to see wineries and taste Nova Scotia wine. They're not coming to check out bottling companies and plants. The benefits of this industry are clear. Will the Premier commit to abandoning the subsidy to bottlers?
I recognize the honourable Minister of Finance.
Okay, Madam Speaker, we've gotten some clarity. It's not the policy that should be discontinued, it's the increase. Well, Madam Speaker, the increase was paused a few months ago, and as we all know, there's working groups have commenced with both commercial bottlers and with grape growers to look at what the future might hold. So, Madam Speaker, we're continuing to work with them, and the increase that the member speaks of has been paused. But I'm glad to hear that they're not suggesting to get rid of that program altogether.
I recognize the honourable member for Bedford South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One group that appears to have been left out in the cold when it comes to the Nova Scotia Loyal program are independent grocers, like Luminant Wellness Market in my riding of Bedford South, which called the announcement of Nova Scotia Loyal, and I'll quote, ridiculous, and said, why don't they, meaning the government, focus on supporting local independence? Madam Speaker, as we all know, local retailers are doing the frontline work to ensure that Nova Scotia products are available to Nova Scotians. And local retailers like Luminant and others often have better prices and more options than some of the big grocers. My question to the Minister is, will she commit to supporting independent grocers across the province rather than big corporations through Nova Scotia Loyal?
I recognize the honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and genuinely, thank you for the question, because again, in this attempt to make Nova Scotia Loyal a one-trick pony or a one-legged stool, this program is about supporting small businesses, businesses, including our growers and our producers and our manufacturers, but yes, our retailers of all types, because for this program to succeed, it is essential that it reach people wherever they are doing their shopping. Retailers, independent retailers, can reach out and get the branding, and studies make clear that when people can find local products on their shelves, in their freezers, that they will purchase them.
I recognize the honourable member of Bedford South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that retailers might get the branding, but I think they would prefer to have the business of people walking through the doors. And Madam Speaker, we all know the benefits of buying local. It's obvious, but the math for Nova Scotia Loyal at this point, to me, doesn't add up. The government projected at one point in time $1.4 billion in economic activity that would be generated by Nova Scotia Loyal I know it just launched, but I would ask the minister, does her department have numbers, and when will that $1.4 billion materialize? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the Premier has already stated, we are building a movement, and it is across Nova Scotia. And so, for instance, while the opposition likes to drive down Nova Scotia Loyal, we received an email from the offices of the member for Fairview Clayton Park telling us what a fantastic program the school vouchers to farmers markets were. And yes, we absolutely are keeping the data because we want this program to succeed, and we know that we will have to tweak and adjust it as we go along. But on farmers markets, for instance, 41% of the families using their vouchers were brand new to those places.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And in my head, I'm just trying to do the math on how many scene points are $1.4 billion, but I didn't have time to figure it out. So the Premier's intent on giving Sobeys money while Nova Scotians are paying more for groceries. And Nova Scotia producers can barely afford to get into big corporations like Sobeys due to the listing fees, advertising fees, and the other fees that producers and others have to pay in order to get their products on the shelves. My question to the minister would be, do you think the money would have been better spent giving to the producers so they could actually get their product in the stores as opposed to the big corporations?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, the name for the incentives to get more space or better placement in grocery stores is called trade spend. And the member is absolutely right that it is a global market and our small producers are at a great disadvantage, which is why having stickers on the shelves, having what's called a wobbler hanging out in front of the shelf, and helping our own domestic marketplace recognize all of the offerings that are already in their stores so that they can try them out. And when sales are come up because it's a quality product, that provides more shelf space going forward.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
I'd like to thank the minister for that education on retailing, considering I worked at Sobeys for a large number of years and charged those fees. But the retailers are, so the producers would be great that they have a wobbler or a sign if they could get their product into the store to begin with. Madam Speaker, without being able to afford a listing fee, they can't afford to get the product. Will the minister commit to helping local producers work with corporations to get their products on the shelves? Thank you.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm very pleased to tell the member opposite that work is already happening. And in fact, while the opposition likes to fixate on a particular aspect of this program, we have worked with all of the different types of vendors, and when it comes to major grocery, we have worked with other vendors who, for instance, don't have points programs, but have told us it's good business to carry more local product. And that's why we've made investments as well through the Community Economic Development Fund in food hubs, including the Cape Breton Food Hub and the Halifax Food Hub, to help our small producers to have shared space for storage, for putting together orders, and for transportation.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Madam Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. In March of this year, representatives from Nova Scotia Health said that agreements with Shanix over the sale of the Hogan Court Hotel were ongoing, but would be finalized in a matter of weeks. At the time, full costs were still unknown, Shanix's rate was being negotiated, and consultants were still being paid for the work on the project. Can the minister confirm if a final agreement is in place, and what is the total cost to Nova Scotians?
I I recognize the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you. I thank the member for the question. So certainly we continue with this exciting project that we're happy to partner with Shannex, with West Bedford. Is a state-of-the-art transition to care facility. While they have taken over the property itself, we continue to work with them, and more details will be available.
I recognize the Honourable Member of Dartmouth North.
It's a disappointing response, actually, Madam Speaker. The Auditor General's February report on the facility raised serious questions about this government's use of untendered agreements, even with Shannex themselves. And despite this criticism, the government's tender database shows a June 13th approval of a startling $120 million untendered contract to Shannex. Can the minister tell us what this $120 is getting us? $120 million, excuse me, is getting us, and why, despite the warnings and criticism from the Auditor General, this government is still spending massive sums of taxpayers' dollars in the dark.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And certainly the building and the model that's been innovated and imagined in Nova Scotia at West Bedford is something that we should all be very, very proud of. We have world-class experts who are going to be providing care to frail elderly people who are in hospital currently, who are transitioning to home. It is going to provide state-of-the-art elder care, which we need in this province. We're so fortunate to have that. We will continue to work on innovative ideas. It does happen through an alternative procurement offer, which allows us to be nimble. So we're either too fast or we're too slow. But on this deal, Madam Speaker, I think we're just right.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Sydney, Member 2.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as we all know, this past week, students have returned back to school. And I want to wish them all well, as well as the educators and the staff. And as we know, this year, we're looking forward to the rollout of the lunch program to complement the breakfast program. These are two very important services now that will be offered in schools to students to take away some of the cost. But something else I think that we can be doing, Madam Speaker, is providing free school supplies to students across Nova Scotia. So my question to the Premier or the Minister of Education, will they commit to looking at free school supplies to all schools across the province?
I recognize the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. I echo the member opposite's welcome back to families and staff and students across the province. We are excited to welcome our students back to school. We know affordability is an issue for families. Madam Speaker, that is why we have introduced Nova Scotia's Made in Nova Scotia school lunch program, fully funded by Nova Scotia, so that students across the province can have access to affordable lunches that's free for those who need it. Madam Speaker, that is an over $18 million investment by Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, we know, though, as well, that families need assistance in other ways, and we're supporting families with school supplies in addition to the work that we're doing on lunches. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Sydney, Member 2.
And thank you, Madam Speaker. And I do want to recognize all of the advocates that have advocated for not only the lunch program, but the breakfast program and any other services that we can provide to students to help them along their educational journey, but also take some of the costs away. It's something that I tabled a few years ago on school supplies, Madam Speaker, because it is something that at this time of year when the weather gets colder and expenses start to build up as people move into the fall, this is something else that is very tangible that we could take the cost away for students. The Strait area is doing it now. Some jurisdictions are doing it now. Some schools are stepping up. Parents are volunteering. They're providing support for free school supplies. And again, this is something easily that the government can do. I know Community Services has just announced it through their program, but I think it can be stretched right across the province. So my question is, will you look at committing...
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to the member opposite for the question. So, Madam Speaker, I appreciate the advocacy that the member opposite talks about, but I would observe that the member opposite was Minister of Education, and member of opposite's advocacy didn't lead to programs for school lunch when he was at in that desk. Madam Speaker, the advocacy at that time didn't lead to school supplies. Madam Speaker, we are acting. We're not advocating, we're acting. That means, Madam Speaker, we're going to be positioned in October to deliver lunches to students across the province, over 75,000 students. That's up to $65 a week for all of our students accessing the lunch program. That's going to be across the province to all students. And when we're done that, Madam Speaker, we'll be happy to look at school supplies.
I recognize the honourable member of Clayton Park West.
Madam Speaker, in my office, we have many cases where landlords are trying to evict tenants so they can raise the rents. Last week, I got a call from a newcomer family with 6 kids. They're paying $1,500 for a 3-bedroom. She's terrified of the eviction. The landlord is saying that the kids are causing too much noise. Is this what the Premier just referred to as not good neighbours? Madam Speaker, the government is going to introduce clearer rules for tenants' behaviour. Will they also release clear rules for landlord behaviour so tenants can be protected?
I recognize the honourable Minister for Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. Of course, we don't want to see anybody evicted, Madam Speaker, but, and again, as I said on the floor of the legislature before, if a landlord is if a tenant is served with a notice for an eviction by their landlord, they can apply to the program. It's there, it works, and it stops the clock on that eviction notice. So that'd be my advice to the member opposite, Madam Speaker. That said, the legislation, and we'll have time to debate the legislation that's on the floor later this afternoon. It's again about striking a balance, trying to strike a balance, and the provisions in the Act about tenant behavior are also for the neighbours that are also tenants. Thank you very much.
I recognize the honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Just as an addition, that family asked to be moved to the main floor so that less noise, and the landlord said no. But they want them out so they can double the rent. But that is the story that I'm brought to the House today. Madam Speaker, we have another case in my office where seniors is seeking help because she has been on the priority housing wait list for a long time. Her caseworker is not replying to her. Across Nova Scotia, we see resources stretched thin as the government struggles to deal with the number of Nova Scotians facing affordability challenges. My question to the Minister of Housing is, will he add more caseworkers to help Nova Scotians?
I recognize the honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Madam Speaker, the reality is we're working across the housing spectrum in many different ways, and to help people, there's many different success stories. I can give you a success story of someone on a home repair and adaptation program. Lorraine McPherson, 69 years old, lives in Antigonish. She applied for a home repair program to help with her roof. The home repair program for $15,000. She said, it may look like a small thing to you, but it was a huge thing for me. I love the new windows and feel safer with my new water tank and half roof. Madam Speaker, I say that to say that we are working across the housing spectrum. We're working on new public housing. We're working on affordable housing. We've made investments across the spectrum. We will continue to do so, and I'll table that.
I recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plain, Lucasville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In 2021, one of the paramount campaign commitments from the Tories was a better paycheck guarantee for Nova Scotians on day one. Now, Madam Speaker, I can remember at the time, coming back to that, wondering, getting calls from people across the province in a few different communities, I won't exaggerate, but a few different communities, not limited to my own, wondering how they were going to accomplish that. So through you, Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if one of the ministers of the government can explain how the government intended to accomplish the better paycheck guarantee that many Nova Scotians would have voted for, and what happened that caused it to implode when they arrived in government.
I recognize the honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to have the question because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the indexing of income tax brackets. everyone, Madam Speaker, working in this province will benefit from the indexing of tax brackets. It's something that many governments have talked about in the past, but a few have delivered on. In fact, none have delivered on until this government, Madam Speaker. And it will certainly become, over time, the largest tax break in the province's history.
I recognize the honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
So that happened sometime thereafter, Madam Speaker. So what I'm getting at is, when the PC party went to doors in 2021, they looked at people in the eyes and they said, we're going to guarantee a better paycheck for you on day one. To me, that's not what was conceived at the time. And I wonder what happened. Why did they get away from that paramount commitment that was right on the front page of that PC platform? That Madam Speaker, must have been the first wobbler that they introduced back in 2021. Madam Speaker, our party, the Nova Scotia Liberal Party, has introduced solutions proposing free transit across the province. We've presented an idea for a 2% HST cut. I'm wondering if the government will commit to a 2% HST cut for Nova Scotians.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, this government has been focused on fixing the healthcare system, and we've said we're not afraid to spend the money to do it, and we've been doing that. 36% more in the health budget compared to the previous government, Madam Speaker. That's a significant increase, Madam Speaker, and we can't be giving out the kinds of tax relief to members suggesting at a time when we're trying to fix the healthcare system. But we have, Madam Speaker, made a commitment to index tax brackets, and that cost is going to grow for government over time, but we believe it's something that's fair for Nova Scotians, and we want them to see income tax relief, Madam Speaker.
I don't mind a little chirping, but it's yelling across the floor. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. In 2019, the Wortley report on street checks found that African Nova Scotians were 6 times more likely to be stopped by the police. Finally, this past weekend, the RCMP issued an historic apology for the discriminatory practice of street checks. Now, it's time for this government to build on that momentum. So, Madam Speaker, will the Minister of Justice stand today and commit to implementing a legislative ban on street checks?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for this important question. I, like many, were at the apology on the weekend, and it was, as Dennis Daly said, it was a long time coming, too long. And those who spoke about the impact of it resonated and said the best apology was a change in behavior. So what I can reassure the member is that with our new Department of Equity and Anti-Racism, as well as the policing review and the new policing standards that are coming out, there is an awful lot of action that is happening within the department to ensure that behavior of policing across this province is better across all sections of policing in the province of Nova Scotia.
I recognize the honourable member of Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as folks in community has said, they wanted a ban on street checks and they wanted it legislated. So we know right now we have a ministerial directive and it is not law. And street checks still happen every day. So without a clear legislative embrace of change, we are doomed to repeat our past mistakes. We need concrete measures in place to ensure we continue to move forward in a way that respects historic injustices, as was spoken on Saturday. So after hearing from the community about the trauma and injustices of what street checks mean to them on Saturday at the apology, why is the minister still not moving forward with a legislative ban on street checks?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. So there are a number of initiatives underway, including the soon-to-be-released African Nova Scotian Justice Action Plan. There is also a comprehensive policing review that is underway. So there are going to be a lot of actions that are going to be taken, but we're going to make sure that we get it right instead of doing it right now. So there is an awful lot that we are working on in terms of bringing forward changes that will be part of a comprehensive plan, including the African Nova Scotian Justice Action Plan and the Indigenous Justice Action Plan. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and welcome to your seat, and congratulations. Madam Speaker, just last weekend, the Premier touted free bus passes for students on his social media accounts, saying that his government is working to make life more affordable for families, and I'll table that. But Nova Scotians are asking, what about everyone else? As the cost of living continues to rise in Nova Scotia, will the Premier commit to making transit free for all Nova Scotians?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for the question. We're always looking for ways to make life more affordable for Nova Scotians and to make transit more sustainable and better. Over the past 3 years, the member would know we've established the JRTA, the Joint Regional Transportation Agency, who is looking at how we can move people more efficiently in around that hour commuter so we're looking for our commute around Halifax, and we'll continue to do our work.
I recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the affordability crisis isn't limited to youth under 18 or families in HRM. It is being felt across the province. And while there are big promises made to get elected, short on delivery. All promises, no progress. He's already admitted that free transit for students can help families. Why won't the Premier make it free for everyone?
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Public Works.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and again, thank the member for the question. Our focus has always been there to make lives more affordable, and my suggestion would be for the honourable member to pick up the phone and call his buddy in Ottawa, and let's talk about carbon tax.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to the ministers has expired. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would you please call government bills for second reading?
Government bills for second reading. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you. Would you please call Bill number 467, Interim Residential Rental Increase Cap Act and the Residential Tenancies Act?
Let me find it here. I don't have my glasses on. Bill number 467, Interim Residential Rental Increase Cap Act and Residential Tenancy Act, an act to amend. I recognize the Honourable Minister for Service Nova Scotia.
Madam, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I move that Bill 467, the Interim Residential Rental Increase Cap Act amended and the Residential Tenancies Act amended, be now read for a second time. Madam Speaker, we all know that we're facing a tight housing market. When our government was elected in 2021, we made it clear that we did not support a rent cap. We didn't believe it was a permanent solution, and that's still the case. What we need most, Madam Speaker, is more choice for the 30% of Nova Scotians who rent. We have a housing plan, and it's working. Housing starts are up, and our government's plan will create tens of thousands of new units. We are creating the conditions needed for more construction, and we're making historic investments in affordable housing. But while we do that, we need to protect Nova Scotians and to balance the rights and responsibilities of both landlords and tenants the best we can. So we are continuing the rent cap at 5% until December 31st, 2027. This will give peace of mind to Nova Scotians who are on a month-to-month, episodic, or periodic lease, that they can predict what their rent increase will be from one year to the next. Madam Speaker, we are also making changes to the Residential Tenancies Act to address problematic tenant behavior, sublets, and eviction timelines for rental arrears. Nova Scotia currently has the longest rental arrear eviction timelines in the country. Right now, landlords must wait 15 days after a tenant's rent is late to file an eviction notice. The tenant then has another 15 days to either pay the rent or dispute the eviction notice. That means a landlord might have to wait a month or more before being able to file an eviction notice. Madam Speaker, that might be fine for a larger corporate landlord who has more units and has more cash coming in, but for a smaller landlord, it can be devastating. And while I recognize people tend to paint all landlords with the same brush, they really aren't the same. If a small landlord struggles with cash flow, they may choose to sell their properties. That means their tenants will no longer have a place to live, and our housing supply issue becomes even greater. These changes will allow landlords to issue an eviction notice 3 full calendar days after rent hasn't been paid. After that, tenants will have 10 calendar days to pay the rent or dispute the eviction notice. Madam Speaker, this is one of those times where it's important for tenants to know their rights. If the tenant wants to dispute the eviction notice, they can apply to the Residential Tenancies Program and stop the clock. Nothing more will happen until a hearing happens and a decision is made. Madam Speaker, another amendment will define the reasons why landlords can apply to the Residential Tenancies Program to end a tenancy for bad tenant behavior. This change will not just help landlords, but other tenants who are neighbors too. Landlords will be able to apply to end a tenancy for bad behavior for the following reasons: when a tenant repeatedly pays their rent late, when they cause extraordinary damage to the property, when they disturb the landlord or other occupants, or even when they engage in illegal activity. Madam Speaker, I often talk about balance with the Residential Tenancies Program, and this is a good example of a change that will benefit both sides. For example, let's say you're a law-abiding person, living in a building where a neighboring tenant is selling drugs. Right now, it's hard for a landlord to evict the tenant who is committing a crime. Meanwhile, for the neighbor, their right to feel safe or to enjoy their own home in peace of mind is being violated. They may feel that there's no other option for them except to move, but we know in today's tight market, that's not a simple solution. These changes clarify circumstances for when landlords can and can't end a tenancy so that they and their tenants and neighbors can continue to live in their homes with peace of mind. These changes will take effect upon proclamation, which we're anticipating will happen in the winter of 2025, and this will allow time for the development of regulations to support the Act. Madam Speaker, we're also clarifying that tenants can't sublet their unit for more rent than they're currently paying. That actually happens. This will protect those subtenants from being exploited and paying higher rent than the original tenant. This change protects not just the landlord, but also the subtenant who may be afraid to bring forward problems to the landlord or apply to the Residential Tenancies Program because they are not the one named on the lease. That change will take effect when this bill is passed. Mr. Speaker, there is also some smaller changes, including one that will allow us to publish director's orders against either tenants or landlords in full or in part at our discretion. This change will bring a new level of transparency to the Residential Tenancies Program that partners have been long asking for. And Mr. Speaker, we are also creating a common anniversary date for land lease communities to make landlord rules clear for all tenants in their community. This will make it easier and clearer for those tenants. Mr. Speaker, if there's one thing I've learned during my time in this portfolio, it's about the importance of understanding your rights and responsibilities. And that's why we began a public education and awareness campaign in the fall of 2021 for the residential tenancies program. Those have been successful, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue these campaigns to help ensure Nova Scotians are armed with the information they need in today's rental market. Mr. Speaker, one final point that I'd like to make is about what we are not doing in these amendments, and we gave serious consideration to whether a compliance and enforcement unit for residential tenancies would help Nova Scotians resolve their issues in this rental market. As we all know, the government commissioned a consultant's report to ask what would be needed if we created such a unit, not should we create such a unit. And we did a careful review of how enforcement units are working across the country in other provinces. And what we concluded, Mr. Speaker, is that a compliance and enforcement unit would create more bureaucracy and more red tape and would not help Nova Scotians resolve their issues with either their tenants or their landlords any faster than the residential tenancy program does. In Ontario, for example, Mr. Speaker, the compliance and enforcement unit has a wait between 4 and 6 months. Not weeks, months. Right now, our average hearing wait time is 5.3 weeks, and I want to commend the department for bringing that down from 8 weeks this time last year. Our residential tenancy program currently has, well, I just said that, sorry. It was important. We triage hearings, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that emergency matters are heard more quickly than that. The amendments before this House are designed to meet the objectives of a compliance and enforcement unit. We are making changes that will help resolve issues more efficiently. Our residential tenancies program is simple and quick to access compared to the waits for many compliance enforcement units across the country, and we are making amendments that will strengthen the program further and make it better and easier and fairer for everyone. The program is there to help, and it works. Our staff helps to mediate between landlords and tenants, and after hearing the issue, orders to identify the next steps that need to be taken. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the high rents and struggles we are seeing in the rental market here in Nova Scotia and across the country are a challenge for many. They are a product of our low vacancy rate, and to fix that, we need to focus on housing supply. We need more places that Nova Scotians can choose from, to choose where and how they want to live. Mr. Speaker, our government has a strong, clear housing plan. We are making historic investments in affordable housing, in student housing, in supportive housing, and in public housing. We're seeing record number of housing starts. We are creating the environment, Mr. Speaker, to incentivize and to build more housing in this province, removing the provincial portion of the HST on new builds, Mr. Speaker, expanding more opportunities for skills trades program, rolling out skilled trade programs in our public schools, Mr. Speaker, and I could go on. We'll continue to keep a close eye on our rental market. We'll continue to make the changes needed to protect tenants and landlords, but most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to address and implement the solution to the housing crisis. That's more housing. Thank you very much.
I recognize the honourable member, Bedford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for those opening comments. This is important legislation, 2 pieces of legislation, and I listened to the Minister closely. I was at the press conference that the Minister had earlier last week to introduce these changes as well. And the one thing that was not mentioned at all in the Minister's opening comments there, that is the elephant in the room when it comes to the current rental situation in Nova Scotia, is the issue of fixed-term leases. It was not mentioned once in the Minister's opening comments, and I hope when he closes second reading, perhaps he will have an opportunity to explain the decision-making process as to why that issue is not being addressed here. And the problem, the fundamental problem that we have right now in Nova Scotia is that if you have a rent cap system and an unregulated fixed-term lease system, those 2 things don't go together. They're like oil and water. They do not mix whatsoever. And if you think about it, if you have a 5% rent cap, which I will come to later, I don't know where that number exactly comes from, but if we have a 5% rent cap, and yet rents year over year for the past several years are going up 10+%, 15+%, something is out of whack. And the something that is out of whack is that we have fixed-term leases that end, and then landlords have an obvious incentive, to use the word the minister mentioned. There is an overriding financial incentive. If someone's renting a 3-bedroom apartment, for example, a constituent of mine, a 3-bedroom apartment on Larry Utech for $17.95, which they've been in since 2017, I believe. If that unit came on the market today, it would be $28,000, $29,000, $3,000 easily. There was a small kitchen fire in that tenant's unit 13 months ago. That tenant and his wife have been out of the unit since then, trying to accommodate themselves at their own expense. They're going through the residential tenancies process. There's been a hearing in their favor. The landlord has appealed to small claims court. And at this point in time, there is no timeline for when they're going to be able to return home. So we're looking at least 14 months. So if you want to have a rent cap, and I know the minister said at the beginning that the government doesn't believe in a permanent rent control system, and I think that's a defensible position. We can argue about that one way or another. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But to have a rent cap system with no changes to fixed-term leases doesn't make sense. It causes a great deal of problems. And if you look to other provinces, there are 5 provinces, other than Nova Scotia, that have some form of a rent cap or rent control system. And what they all do is have a system where there is not a fixed-term lease. Loophole isn't even the right word. It's a chasm. It's a canyon. What we've proposed in our Liberal caucus is what they have in British Columbia, which is where at the end of a fixed-term lease, the lease converts to a month-to-month. Now, if both parties agree to end the fixed-term lease, it ends. And in many cases, that would happen here in Nova Scotia too. If you're a student who's here for 8 months, if you're a travel nurse, if you're somebody here on construction job, you're a consultant here, whatever the case might be, you might need a fixed-term lease. I don't dispute that. I'm not saying they should not exist. But for the many, many Nova Scotians who find themselves in fixed-term leases, often without even knowing that they've signed a fixed-term lease, there has to be some degree of protection. And that is common knowledge, I would say, in other provinces. And it befuddles me as to why we are not doing the same here in Nova Scotia. It's an obvious problem. But another issue is that we don't know how big of a problem it is. All we have are anecdotes and stories and perceptions and feelings, because we also don't have effective data for rental registries. So I would love to know, since 2021, what proportion of leases signed in Nova Scotia are fixed-term lease, and how does that compare to the 3 years prior? But we just don't know. And I think that's something that the department and the government should seriously look at, because if we don't have good data, we're all just grasping at straws to one degree or another, and that's not how good policy is made. So I think that's another major gap here in our knowledge base on fixed-term leases. So all in all, I think that is by far the biggest issue we see with this bill, and with the complete disregard that this is a massive problem in our rental market that has not been closed or solved by this legislation at all. And you all remember probably when you were at school, I found this was in math class a lot. I know, segue. Math class a lot, the teacher would scroll at the top, show your work, right? Show your work. Don't just give me the answer, show the work. Frustrating thing to read. Frustrating thing to read. But I also want the government to show their work on this bill. So we have 2 pieces of the Interim Residential Rental Increase Cap Act, and I don't know where either of them comes from. There's a deadline that has been extended to December 31st, 2027. Why? Was that name plucked out of the hat we voted for Speaker in? I don't know. It seems arbitrary. It seems random. Again, the minister and the department have given no explanation as to why that is. We all hope that the housing situation is much better in a little over 2 years. Maybe it's not, and maybe we just keep punting the football down the field, and that's not a way to make good policy either. So that's one piece. But the thing that's more important to show your work on is the increase, the maximum allowable increase. So it's 5% right now. It's 5% next year. It's 5% for 27 as well. And I don't know why. There's no explanation as to where that number came from. Other provinces that have a rent cap system have formulas that inform where the number comes from. And in most cases, it's some combination of inflation and the cost of a basket of goods and so on, and it makes sense. And we have legislation again on that, and I believe my colleagues in the NDP do as well, that makes sense to get to a number. So I took a look for next year, 2025, the other provinces that have a rent cap or rent control system in place, this is what their rental increases look like. New Brunswick is the highest other than Nova Scotia at 4.7%, although tenants in New Brunswick have the ability to apply for a gradual phase-in of that 4.7% over the course of the year. The next highest is British Columbia, 3%. Then we have Ontario, 2.5%, PEI, 2.3%, and Manitoba, 1.7%. So this is not a list I think you want to be number one on, but it's a list that we are number one on. And every other province that has a rent cap or rent control system shows their work and justifies the rental increase that they're asking the hundreds of thousands or millions of people in their province who are renters to pay. And I think that is a baseline level of rigor that our departments and our government should exercise, and I don't see that in this case. So we all know that we have an ongoing housing crisis in Nova Scotia. We have huge increases in rents. Depending where you are in Nova Scotia, you're looking at 1% or less vacancy rate, so it's impossible to find another apartment if you have to. And this bill has huge gaps, and this government has huge gaps when it comes to, in particular, the issue of fixed-term leases, which has had nothing done for the past 3 years and is causing tremendous pain, suffering, misery, and anxiety in Nova Scotia. And second of all, the issue of evidence, showing your work and explaining why a 5% rental increase year over year is justified. So I hope the minister and other members of the government can answer those questions, but those are the major issues that I wanted to raise here in second reading. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad for the opportunity to outline at this second reading stage of the game our party's response to the changes in the Rent Cap Act and the Residential Tenancies Act as they're contained in Bill 459. As I see it, Madam Speaker, the crisis in rental housing in Nova Scotia at the moment has three primary components that are within the capacity of the government immediately to solve. One, the temporariness of the rent cap, leading to all manner of instability and insecurity in the world of rental housing. Two, the exclusion of new tenancies from the rent cap, limiting the overall effectiveness of the cap and providing an incentive to landlords to conclude tenancies and evict tenants so as to get around the cap. And three, the ubiquity of fixed-term leases, which provide landlords with a broad means of concluding tenancies and evicting tenants, thereby undermining the security of tenure provisions of the Residential Tenancies Act and undercutting the purpose of the cap. But what we have in Bill 459, I want to suggest, is a measure that addresses just part of problem one of these three, while, if anything, by its expediting evictions, making problems 2 and 3 worse than they were before. So let's begin with problem 1, the temporariness of the rent cap. So here we are with Rent Cap 4, the fourth iteration of a short-term 16, 18, 24, 30-month establishment or extension of a rent cap by a Conservative party and previously a Liberal party, both of which have long expressed themselves as having deep philosophical reservations about the principle of rent control, with the result that presently in Nova Scotia, the whole matter of rents and the future of rents remains an object of anxiety and insecurity and worry. for the hundreds of thousands of people in our province who rent their homes. Now, this is not to say that the extension of the cap in this bill is not welcome news. It is welcome news, and it is an important moment for us to express admiration for those organizations like ACORN and Dalhousie Legal Aid, who have consistently pressured the government to do what they have never wanted to do, that is, remove rents, even temporarily, from the unregulated power of the market. This is, however, to say that there are so many problems that a merely temporary rent cap cannot solve. Problems that can be helpfully and constructively dealt with in a system of permanent rent control, such as the one we in the NDP have been advocating for since we first submitted our Rental Fairness and Affordability Act here quite a number of years ago. A system of permanent rent control is just that. It is not random, not, in the words of the previous speaker, arbitrary. It is a system. That is what a temporary rent cap cannot aspire to be. For example, in the NDP-governed provinces of Manitoba and British Columbia, where the permitted maximum rent increases this year are 1.7% and 3.5%, respectively, those numbers are derived, again, to use the phrase of the previous speaker, in a way that shows the work, derived by a formula. And in the acceptance of rent control in those provinces, that formula is embedded, is placed before the public and embedded in regulations and in legislation. By contrast, where in fact does Nova Scotia's 5% come from? You know, does the minister know? The minister has provided no indication that he has any sense of the logic of the derivation of that number. Does the Premier know? The Premier has provided no indication that he has any awareness of the logic of the derivation or the derivation of where that 5% comes from. So that not only is this 5% in this legislation the highest permitted ceiling of any rent cap in Canada, it also has the terrible deficiency that it is in fact arbitrary. That is to say, it is random, it is without foundation, it is capricious. So a permanent rent control system, such as what we had in Nova Scotia until the mid-1990s, and I'm old enough to remember doing advocacy under that system and remember how well, in fact, it worked. A permanent rent control system, such as we had here and lost in the mid-90s, and such as is the NDP's proposal, is a system, not an arbitrary invention, not a number pulled out of the sky. It is, in fact, a system which provides people, as systems do, with the predictability that they need. Now, predictability in the world of rents and housing, predictability is one awfully important consideration. Yes. And we can think about how this is true just to our own lives and the lives of people we know from many different points of view. Maybe I'll just put forward one. Consider the person, this is a type of person very common in our province, who is an older person and owns their own home. Let's say that they're single and that they're considering the possible option of downsizing to an apartment. Now, while there's no system of permanent rent control, that person can have no confidence of what that future apartment cost is apt to be. Whereas in their home, even though it might be a lot larger and more expensive than they'd want to be in, there is in their home a certain stability in the costs that they're going to have in the years coming up before them. In any case, that person, and there are a lot of them, is not in a position to put their whole housing life and their whole financial life under a question mark by downsizing in a rental market where the current rent cap may be renewed or it may not be renewed this year or in 2 years or in 3 years' time, potentially opening the door to the wild west of exponential rent increases that was the case before the Liberals were publicly pressured to bring in Rent Cap 1 in 2020. Yes. And it is not simply tenants who would be better off with a permanent rent control system. I speak with a lot of landlords. There are quite a number of neighborhoods in Halifax, Chebucto, where there are more resident landlords than there are resident tenants. And as I visit door to door in the constituency I serve and speak about these subjects, I have all kinds of opportunities to talk with landlords, especially smaller landlords, about their frustrations with costs that continue to inflate, insurance, taxes, maintenance, and so on, while they are capped in the price that they can charge to rent their asset. Landlords are often surprised and pleased and wanting to hear more when they learn that it is only under the temporary conservative and previous liberal rent caps that there's no recourse for them in this situation. Whereas under the system we had previously in Nova Scotia and under the system we in the NDP are proposing for a permanent rent control system, they would have the opportunity to be provided with an avenue to present extraordinary expenses and apply for a cap exemption. So that's problem one. The temporariness, and therefore the random, unpredictable arbitrariness of the rent cap, which the government's current measure with its 2-year extension only partially addresses. But I want to speak some about problem two in the current rental housing crisis in the province, which the government has the capacity to move on immediately if they so choose. And that is the limitedness of the rent cap to current present tenancies and the exclusion of the rent cap of new tenancies from its provisions. This current iteration of the temporary rent cap 4, has this same exact provision as its predecessor and its predecessor before that, and this is at the root of the fact that the current rent cap is a failure at the only things that rent caps are supposed to do, and that is cap the rent. So a rent cap surely can't be a successful program if rent increases are not even within sight of the rent cap. And that is exactly the situation that we have at the moment, as was made so clear a few weeks ago in the rentals.ca report that I tabled earlier this afternoon, which outlined how average rent increased last year to $2,378, or an increase of 18%. That is the August numbers from rentals.ca, which are 13 percentage points greater than the rent cap. So a reasonable person looking at a 5% rent cap and an 18% rent increase could reasonably ask, how could a rent cap possibly fail that completely? So it didn't go up to 6.5%. It didn't go up to 7.25%. It didn't even stay in the single digits. It went from over 5% of the cap to 18%. In fact, the answer to this question is that this rent cap is designed to fail because it is so defined as to exclude all new tenancies. And the effect of this is that the more tenancy conversion landlords can achieve, the more of their properties are excluded from the cap. That is to say, the current rent cap is a failure because landlords are able to circumvent it if they are able to move out their tenants, which they do in significant numbers by the growing prevalence in Nova Scotia of eviction. And here we come to the real problem. The way that eviction, the violent displacement, one author called it, of eviction, is in fact incentivized by the way the rent cap is presently set up. A recent study out of the University of British Columbia demonstrated, I'll table it, that Nova Scotia has the highest rate of evictions of any province in the country, with the sole exception of BC. Yeah. And a more recent study released just last week here in the city by Acorn showed that 36% of surveyed tenants had already somewhere else previously been evicted. And that's an interesting figure because it compares to the situation just 3 years ago when only 6% of tenants reported having previously been evicted. So in 3 years, from 6% of tenants who had been previously evicted to 36%. The same study clearly relates the prevalence of evictions to the exponential rise in rents. Of tenants who have been forced to move in the last 5 years in our province, 85% reported that they'd had to pay more for their new place than for their old one. And I want to be sure to note here also, Madam Speaker, that although the government does in fact powerfully incentivize landlords to evict their tenants under the current system, there are, and I want to carefully note this, there are many landlords who refuse to do this. Yes. There are many landlords who refuse to respond by evicting their tenants to the pressure and incentives that are placed on them by the maldesign of the rent cap system as we have it. Yes. There are many landlords who appreciate the care and the quality of their tenants, the care of their properties, the quality of their relationships with them, often over many long periods, and who, when they look at the financial pressures they're under, they examine the financial incentives that the government is giving them to evict their tenants and get more new tenants who will not be affected by the rent cap. They nevertheless have a moral sense that causes them to refuse to take part in the great property owners' push to put people on the street. Now, and I want to put before the House that I have met and spoken with many such landlords. And I think that their sense of reciprocity and their sense of fairness is something that should be noted and respected here and uplifted. So I've spoken about problem one, the current rental crisis and the temporariness of the rent cap. Problem two, the fact that the rent cap excludes new tenancies. And this brings me to the third problem in the rental crisis, which, if the government wanted to, it could immediately solve. And that is the ubiquity, the across-the-boardness of the misuse of fixed-term leases. Now, I want to say this carefully. The minister's hollow discourse about how fixed-term leases have their place, etc., flies in the face of every evidence that the across-the-board use of fixed-term leases is by far the main means by which landlords are evicting, turning over their units, and thereby doing the raising of their rents beyond the 5%. So the ACORN study I was just mentioning, it's called Understanding Fixed-Term Lease Use in Nova Scotia, is definitive about this. The study found that when tenants were asked why they signed their fixed-term lease, over 99%, well, if that's not ubiquitous, I don't know what is. If that's not across the board, I don't know what is. Over 99% responded that a fixed-term lease was the only form of lease that that landlord had presented and put before them. Now, I think it's important for the government to hear some of the narrative responses in that survey that people provided. Here's one, and I quote, "The last time I moved, the only affordable option I could find was a fixed-term lease. And now I've just learned that they will not be renewing my lease so that they can raise the rent. There have been no renovations at all to justify this increase. I moved here because it was all I could afford, and now, a year later, I'm forced to move again when all my options are even more expensive than before. What's happening in this province is simply unjust," unquote. Here's another. "In 11 years, I've lived in 10 different apartments. Every time I've moved, it's because I've been rent-evicted or evicted on a fixed-term lease," unquote. Here's a third. "Our landlords decided not to reoffer our fixed-term lease after we lived there for years. They said we were great tenants, but they just needed to raise the rent. We had to secure a new place with a 3-month probationary fixed-term lease that is wildly more expensive, but we still accepted it because we don't have much choice. I had to increase my hours at work and take on a second job just to make ends meet," unquote. It is, in my view, an incompetent and mean-spirited dereliction of responsibility on the government's part to bring forward amendments to the residential rental increase cap and the Residential Tenancies Act without addressing whatsoever these harmful deficiencies, these hurtful deficiencies of the present setup, by which both the financial security and the housing security of hundreds of thousands of people in our province are being so severely and seriously undermined. Now, it is true, Madam Speaker, that the bill before us overlooks the glaring deficiencies of the exclusion of new tenancies from the rent cap, and it overlooks the ubiquity of fixed-term leases. But it's also true, quite shockingly, that at the same time, this bill also exacerbates and intensifies those same weaknesses and deficiencies by, of all things, facilitating evictions in Nova Scotia.
Shame.
What a bizarre and ill-chosen moment for the government to legislate to make it quicker and easier for landlords to evict their tenants. Shame. When the HRM is literally unable to expand the designated homeless encampment sites quick enough to contain the numbers of those daily being made newly homeless by the wide range of means by which landlords are already evicting now.
Shame.
Someone said to me this should be called the More Evictions Faster bill. That's about the size of it. One struggles. Always when we are in the position of a contention, one of the things we try to do is to put ourselves in the position and understand the thinking of the group or the person that we're contending and disagreeing with. One genuinely struggles to figure out where a person would have to be in their thinking in the fall of 2024 that they would look at the housing crisis in Nova Scotia and say, oh, I got an idea. I know what to do. Here's the thing that'll take us forward. Let's facilitate evictions. And we try to say, well, under what frame of mind would you be in to come to this conclusion? I think a person could only see the present moment as a good moment to address the housing crisis by facilitating evictions if, in fact, A, they were at an awful remove and a great personal distance from the realities of the present housing crisis, and B, if they simply had no real notion, no real knowledge, no real sense of what terrible things evictions really are. If they had never just been around the life-unraveling and sickening feeling that comes over anyone who reads the letter at the front door that gives that date at which the landlord is demanding you be elsewhere, and then has to face the endless uncertainty, the plans to change the kids' schools, the family's pictures packed away in some friend's half-damp basement, and overall the depression and the despair that the word eviction really, in real life, actually means. So there's an important study, it's called Evicted, by an author named Matthew Desmond, where he gives an important exploration of this reality. The book explores through extensive interviews the detailed circumstances of what people go through when they're actually evicted. And it concludes with an epilogue that has the title Home and Hope. And I would like to read a couple short passages from Home and Hope. Desmond writes this. Then there is the toll eviction takes on a person's spirit. The violence of displacement can drive people to depression, and in extreme cases, even suicide. 1 in 2 recently evicted mothers reports multiple symptoms of clinical depression, double the rate of similar mothers who were not forced from their homes. Even after years pass, evicted mothers are less happy, energetic, and optimistic than their peers. When several patients committed suicide in the days leading up to their eviction, a group of psychiatrists published a letter in the journal Psychiatric Services identifying eviction as what they called a significant precursor of suicide. The letter emphasized that none of the patients were facing actual homelessness, leading the psychiatrists to attribute the suicides to eviction itself. They wrote, eviction must be considered a traumatic rejection, a denial of one's most basic human needs. Suicides attributed to evictions and foreclosures doubled between 2005 and 2010 in the United States, years when housing costs were soaring. I want to read one other paragraph from the study Evicted. Desmond writes, losing your home and your possessions and often your job, being stamped with an eviction record, relocating to often degrading housing in more dangerous or poor neighborhoods, Suffering from increased material hardship, homelessness, depression, and illness, this is eviction's fallout. Eviction does not simply drop poor families into a dark valley, a trying yet relatively brief detour on life's journey. It fundamentally redirects their way, casting them onto a different and much more difficult path, unquote. But no, I can hear the government saying, no, we're talking here about expediting evictions for people who didn't pay their rent. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to submit in this debate that there are many sound reasons why people cannot pay their rent. And there are many sound reasons why people cannot pay their rent within 3 business days of the day that it is due. How many examples we could bring forward from our experience. I want to just bring forward one. Let us think about a senior couple who are on their own in the world. One member of the senior couple handles the finances. The other one is not able to do that. At the very end of the month, the member of the couple who handles the finances has a stroke. Yeah. Let's say this is on a Friday. They're in the hospital. They don't have a cell. They're not able, in fact, to speak to anybody until the social worker in the hospital is able to get to them. That's not going to be Monday. It's not going to be on the weekend. It's not apt to be Tuesday. It's probably to be Wednesday, maybe even Thursday. And don't let anybody suggest that this would be a rare occurrence. There's not a hospital in Nova Scotia where this doesn't happen every single week. This happens in our hospitals every day. Now, this bill says that it's all right for the landlord to serve that couple with an eviction notice before that check gets in. It makes no difference, I don't think, that there are provisions for that tenant to make this or that response once they get the notice. The fact is that before that bill is passed, under the current regime today, that landlord may not legally send that senior in the hospital who's had the stroke. They may not send that letter to them until 15 days. But once this bill becomes passed and becomes law, that letter will be legal for that senior to receive in that hospital after 3 business days. Thank you so much to all the conservative progressives. Sure. So the document distributed by the government for the briefing of this bill last Friday said this, that the Act requires amendments to establish a greater balance between tenants and landlords. And when I read this, I immediately felt like responding. Amendments to establish a greater what? This minister ought to be openly scoffed at every time in the future he publicly pronounces the word balance, after offering as his primary manifestation of this important principle nothing more than a smoothened path for landlords to put their people on the street. Shame. Shame. Now, none of this is to say, Madam Speaker, that we don't have an eviction problem. We do have an eviction problem. We have a very serious eviction problem. It has a whole variety of components. We have a serious eviction problem with landlords evicting tenants under the provisions that permit this in cases where the property is needed for family. And then it turns out that when the rent unit is rented, not to family at all, but at a markedly increased rent to just some other tenant, which the former tenant is enraged to hear about and find out about on Kijiji, but they've already moved on. They're not necessarily wanting to enter into a whole residential tenancies case against the former landlord, who they're glad to see in the rearview mirror. Now, many members of this House would know of situations of this sort. Yes. I certainly know of several, but this serious eviction problem is entirely unaddressed, not one word in this More Evictions Faster bill. We have a very serious evictions problem with seniors being rent-evicted and having no place to go, applying to seniors' housing and facing a multi-year wait list. In Quebec, such people may not be evicted until the day that their name comes up on the seniors' housing list. We in the Halifax-Chebucto NDP have been going door to door for 1.5 years with a petition to adopt the Quebec provision here in Nova Scotia. People are almost universally pleased to sign this petition because they are morally offended by the numbers of seniors forced to live in their cars in the Walmart parking lot in Nova Scotia. But the More Evictions Faster bill doesn't do anything at all about this. We have a very serious evictions problem with rent eviction in general. And it's neither here nor there that there may or may not be this or that many formal residential tenancies, appeals, and hearings on these rent evictions, as the minister sometimes answers. The truth is, in real life, that the vast majority of people, they go into moving mode the day they get the rent eviction letter, whatever the formal legal standing of that document. It's a letter that fills people immediately with such sadness that often they've just immediately lost the heart anyway to stay there any longer. It's a big, big eviction problem, but not a word about it here in the More Evictions Faster bill. You got a big problem with pet evictions. Landlords declaring no pet policies in buildings in hopes of getting tenants with pets to leave and thereby re-rent the units with outside of the provisions of the rent cap. I was surprised to get an envelope in the mail recently from a group in the Valley who'd become aware of the NDP's Family Pet Renter Protection Act prohibiting pet evictions, who'd gathered 150 signatures in support of the measure. I forwarded them to the minister's attention. But More Evictions Faster doesn't touch on this at all. Nor, as I explained previously, does the bill do anything about the epidemic of fixed-term list evictions, which has entirely undermined the provisions of security of tenure in the Act, which it is the government's responsibility to uphold. No, all we have in this bill is the expediting, the removal of administrative barriers, the facilitating of eviction. I find the enterprise of this legislation mean, Madam Speaker. I find it unbalanced and one-sided. I find it hurtful. And I find it sad to think that after 3 years of working with this problem, this is the best that the government can do. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
If I am to recognize the Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia, it will be to close debate on second reading. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia.
Lots to digest there, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the feedback from members opposite. A little bit on data that the member from Bedford South spoke about. So I do want to commend the department, who's also working with my other department, Cybersecurity and Digital Solutions, for their modernization efforts of the landlord, a new landlord and tenant information system, which is sort of on the inside of the changes that we're doing within the department, which will help improve data collection. We do not have a rental registry, and in case the members opposite are wondering, we're not looking to do that. We believe that we'll have more data through that modernized system, and also, the triaging of cases of hearings is already taking place, but that will be streamlined through this new landlord and tenant information system to make it better and fairer for tenant and landlords. Madam Speaker, spoken at length before, said it in the bill briefing, said it today in my opening remarks, said it in last session, the session before. We do not believe in a rent cap. We do not believe that is a permanent solution. I know members opposite have strong feelings about that. We believe that we need to get to a spot where the free market can self-regulate itself for the price of housing. That said, Madam Speaker, we are working hard, and it's across government. I know ministerial colleagues have talked about this, that it's not just a one department issue here. There's so many departments involved in tackling the housing crisis in this province. It goes hand in hand with affordability. So whether it be the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing, whether it be the Department of Community Services, whether it be Public Works on how we get people and goods and services in and out of the city and across the province. The fact is, Madam Speaker, and the members opposite talked about doing our work. Not one member opposite talked about the work that we're doing to actually address the housing crisis in the province. Well, we can all agree that there's a housing crisis in this province, but not one member opposite talked about what we need to fix the housing crisis, and that's more housing. More housing. And every time we get up on this side of the legislature, talk about our initiatives, guess what, Madam Speaker, as the Premier indicated today, the NDP had sat on millions of dollars, turned a blind eye. The government before us, the Liberals, saw this challenge coming, didn't do anything about it, Madam Speaker. But guess what? We are the government that's taking this head on. So we can go blue in the face, red in the face or NDP orange in the face. But the fact is, Madam Speaker, we are making historical investments that we haven't seen in this province in a long time, and I wish that past governments would have done it. But the fact is, we are getting it done, Madam Speaker. So there's a lot more to be said. I'll have more time to speak on these amendments. But with that, Madam Speaker, I move to close second reading on Bill 467. Thank you.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 467, Intern Residential Rental Increase Cap Act and Residential Tenancy Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary minded, nay? Nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 467, an act to amend Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2021, the Interim Residential Rent Increase Cap Act, and Chapter 401 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Residential Tenancies Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to Standing Committee on Law Amendments. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would you please call private and local bills for second reading? Private and local bills for second reading.
Find my page. Private and local bills for second reading.
Yes.
I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Do I have to call the bill, don't I? Yes. Would you please call Bill number 469, an act to incorporate the trustees of the Hunter Church Building Fund, an act to amend?
Bill 469, an act to incorporate the trustees of the Hunter Church Building Fund. I recognize the Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that Bill 469, an act to amend Chapter 81 of the Acts of 1876, an act to incorporate the trustees of the Hunter Church Building Fund, be read a second time. I have been asked by the Secretary of the Board on behalf of the trustees of the Hunter Church Building Fund to present this private and local bill. This is basically a housekeeping bill, a housekeeping amendment. Proposed changes are not substantial, and they would tidy up some historical language issues. And now I'll pass it over to my honourable colleagues across the floor if they have any comments to add.
I recognize the Honourable Member for Halifax-Chebucto.
What? Sure. Just to say, Madam Speaker, that the Hunter Fund has a marvelous record over many generations, particularly in its support of the rural church in Nova Scotia. It has directed its assets towards the infrastructure of rural churches, both sanctuaries and halls and manses for a long time, and made the financial lives of many congregations which would otherwise have not been financially tenable over an extended period. So anything that is a support or request that comes from the Hunter Fund is something that the House should look at favorably, and we certainly would be happy to do that.
If I am to recognize the Honourable Member for Queens, it will be to close debate on second reading. The Honourable Member of Queens.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague across the aisle for his kind comments, and certainly very important when we're recognizing our rural churches across our province. So with those few comments, I move to close second reading of Bill number 469.
The motion is for second reading of Bill 469, an act to incorporate the trustees of Hunter Church Building Fund. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary minded, nay? The motion is carried.
Bill 469, an act to amend Chapter 81 of the Acts of 1876, an act to incorporate the trustees of the Hunter Church Building Fund.
Ordered that the bill be referred to the Second Committee of Private and Local Bills. I'd like to recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That concludes government business for the day. I move that the House do now rise to meet again on Wednesday, September 11th, between the hours of 1 and 6. Since tomorrow is Opposition Day, I'll turn the floor over to my honourable colleague to call opposition business of the day.
I recognize the Honourable House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Deputy, but that's okay. For tomorrow, opposition bills will be Bill 460, the Free Public Transit Act, 472, Seniors Care Grant Improvement Act, and 465, the HST Reduction Act. Oh my gosh, late debate is the topic of the NDPs. We will defer to them as to that, and that is all she wrote.
I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I just want to make a correction. I called hours tomorrow 1 to 6. They're actually 1 to 5:30. My apologies.
The motion is that the House rise to meet again on September the 11th from 1 to 5:30, between the hours of 1 to 5:30. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried. We stand adjourned.